All right, folks. Joining me now, great fun, Vivek Ramaswamy, former 2024 Republican presidential candidate, old friend, recently paused his campaign and has signed on with Donald Trump, who was very pleased to have Vivek. Vivek, we're very pleased to have you back here on the Kudlow Show. Vivek, I want you to weigh in, if you would. You heard Jackie Heinrich. President doesn't want to deal with Speaker Mike Johnson. The president and the Democrats are opposed to H.R. 2, which I think is a very decent Trump-like plan to close the border. What do you think of this? What kind of advice would you give the GOP in the Senate and or the House?
My advice to the GOP would, let's restore some common sense to our foreign policy. Many are sooner concerned about protecting Ukraine's border than they are about protecting our own border right here at home in the United States of America. And I would certainly encourage everybody to vote for more military resources on our southern border than we're shipping over to Ukraine. As it relates to Ukraine, there is no clear plan or argument for what the next $60 billion is going to do that the first $100+ billion did not already do. And so what we need is a plan and a path to diplomatic resolution in Ukraine, while actually securing our own border where we do have an invasion. And I know you're not supposed to say it that way, but if there were 3 million Chinese on the West Coast or 3 million Iranians coming in on the East Coast, we would call that an invasion. And it has qualities of an invasion on our own southern border. And so I think it is a perfectly appropriate use of our national defense resources to protect our own southern border, and that should be table stakes before discussing the protection of anybody else's border, especially when we're in a $34 trillion national debt crisis right now ourselves. So that would be my advice, Larry.
I mean, that's a good... Listen, Vivek, it's as we've talked down through this past year, and President Trump has said, former President Trump has said, there's plenty. I mean, I don't know what the head count is, but there could be at least 100 terrorists or more who have crossed over into our border because of the Biden open border and the illegal problem. That's point number one. And point number two, Vivek, it astonishes me that Republicans still have not succeeded in getting a microscope or a spotlight on this Ukrainian money, how much of it is really necessary, how well is it being spent, and why no one is attempting some sort of diplomatic response, diplomatic effort to stop that war, which, as you know, is something President Trump has talked about. You yourself have talked about that. Why the heck would you go into a lousy border deal, point number one, and point number two, without any sensible discussions of Ukraine?
Well, look, I think that actually we need to focus first on the border, seal the border with our own military, end federal funding for sanctuary cities, end federal funding to Central American countries, and require them to build their own border walls all the way from Venezuela to the southern border of Texas. Combine that with ending birthright citizenship for the kids of illegals in this country, and we have our border crisis mostly solved. Then let's turn to Ukraine. And one of the things that worries me about Ukraine, Larry, is that we are escalating the risk of World War III by driving Russia further into China's hands. So I'll be very specific to Republicans on what I think we need to be pushing for as a diplomatic resolution to that war. Require that Russia exit its military alliance with China, and in return make some reasonable offers that we should offer anyway, that NATO will not admit Ukraine to NATO, and a reasonable discussion about what happens in the east of Ukraine. That's a reasonable path to resolution that decreases the risk of World War III, and it's the financially and I would say militarily responsible thing for the United States of America. And so, yes, that's how we need to lead this country, with common sense, with basic norms that say that we're going to protect the invasion on our own border while peacefully resolving a path in Ukraine that I think is going in a direction that isn't in the U.S.'s best interests, and I don't think is in the best interests of the Western world more generally. But it does take somebody willing to speak common sense to bring that level of leadership to our Republican Party that I think is at times lost on this issue.
Vivek, you know, I've heard President Trump many times talk about the need for a diplomatic solution to Ukraine as soon as possible. Have you spoken to him about the idea of keeping Ukraine out of NATO?
I have not spoken to him specifically about that, but if I were, and we're going to be spending more time together on the campaign trail, I do think it's vital that he become the next president. I dropped out after getting about 8% in Iowa because I want all of that support in New Hampshire and elsewhere to go towards President Trump. But what I would lay out is some detail on exactly how we can do that. James Baker made a commitment to Gorbachev in 1990, saying that NATO should not expand 1 inch, not 1 inch is what he said, past East Germany. We haven't kept that commitment. So just by standing by our own commitment and reaffirming that, we can use that to also pull Russia apart from China. That's the single greatest lever we have to reduce the risk of World War III. And so I think sensible foreign policy for the Republican Party to embrace is avoid World War III, declare economic independence from communist China, but then use our own military resources to defend our own homeland, including the southern and increasingly the northern border of the United States. That's true America First policy. It's common sense. I think many centrists and even some Democrats should be able to get behind that, and I think that's how we move our party into the future, Larry. And so that's what I will be telling President Trump if he and I talk about that on the campaign trail.
Let me shift a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. After the resounding victory that President Trump had in Iowa, the people in Davos, the leaders in the World Economic Forum in Davos, I know they're not your best friends. That's a joke, but it's serious. They're all kind of dirtying and pooping in their pants now at the thought that Donald Trump may be reelected president, which is dirtying and pooping that I love, actually. That'd be great fun. But I got to read you the latest one that's just come out. I see you got a smile on your face. Thank you for that. They're demanding, you're going to love this, Vivek. They are demanding that we have an international criminal court prosecution of, wait for it, something called ecocide. Ecocide. This is coming out of Davos. Ecocide. Now, I don't know what they think they're talking about. Mr. Trump or President Trump will never buy into that. What does this crowd want? Everything they want. Global warming, John Kerry, it's freezing out in Iowa. Nobody seems to understand that. Big government solutions, big corporate solutions, not small government, small business, entrepreneurial solutions. You know, Vivek, if you stay with Trump and you go into his government, I want you to go after Davos. You're going to be the special emissary to go to Davos and quiet that crowd down. I won't say blow them up because that would be wrong, but quiet them down or give them a facelift or do something for heaven's sake.
We're not going to quiet them down. We're going to shut them down. That's what we're going to do, Larry. And I think that you ask what's motivating them. Here's the answer, Larry. It's just like every three-letter agency here. We should think about ATF, CDC, Department of Education. That's a three-letter multilateral institution, WEF. My answer to all of them with acronyms is shut them down. What they want is old world Europe. You ask what they want. It's actually a revival of old world monarchy that was skeptical of self-governance. That's what King George believed. That's what the kings of old world Europe believed. And we fought a revolution in 1776 to say that for better or worse, we the people, the citizens of this nation, engage in self-governance. We're the ones who decide how we fight climate change, whether or how we fight racism or whatever the alleged challenge is. We the people make those decisions at the ballot box, not in the mountaintops of Davos. This is that ugly monster of the old world rearing its head again in the avatar of Klaus Schwab and Larry Fink and the others who speak that old world vision. And we should say absolutely no to that vision. We're a self-governing constitutional republic. That's what it means to be an American, and that's what it means to stand for our 1776 ideals in this country. And you have my word, I will stop at nothing. You know, talking about peaceful means, of course, but stop at nothing, legally and otherwise, to make sure that these people are put back in their place and we have true sovereignty in the United States of America.
I must say, I don't know if it's possible, but it's a noble cause. It's a very noble cause, and I hope you stay with it. I'm going to ask everybody today on the show, Vivek, you're going to be campaigning in New Hampshire. How does New Hampshire look for Mr. Trump?
Look, I was there, just last night? Feels like a long time ago, but I was side by side with Trump. We spoke to a large audience. I think it's looking pretty good. I do think that a lot of the libertarians in New Hampshire should now come this direction. That's part of what I wanted to throw in Trump's direction with my endorsement. I was attracting a lot of libertarian support. And my case to the libertarians would be, you want to go the direction of an old Republican Party of Dick Cheney that forks over our money to fight foreign wars that don't advance our interests, and a surveillance state at home that ties your internet profiles to your social media accounts to your government-issued ID. I think that's the wrong vision. Nikki Haley and other Republicans may stand for that. But if you want to vote for liberty, the last best chance left in this race is Donald Trump. And I'm going to do everything in my power, both over the course of this year and over the course of the next 4 years, to make sure we stand for those liberty-minded principles. And I do think that libertarian support shifting Donald Trump's direction, especially in a state like New Hampshire, should make a difference that's wide enough to end this primary in New Hampshire, as I believe it should, and then reunite this party and then reunite this country. And I'll do everything in my power to make that happen.
All right, great message. Vivek Ramaswamy, class act, terrific stuff. Good luck on the campaign trail. Thanks for coming back on the show.